To everyone who is just joining us, we will begin in about 30 seconds or so. Okay, welcome everyone. I think we will go ahead and get started. There are a few more people joining us, but we'll get going on things. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Crystal Jacob. I am a proud supporter of the Lois Hole Hospital Women's Society and co-chair of our development committee. The Lois Hole Hospital Women's Society is a group of women in all ages and stages of life who are passionate about and committed to raising excellence in women's health care and healthcare treatments. The Women's Society raises awareness for important funds for a variety of initiatives for the Lois Hole Hospital for Women. And we host our Mind and Body Talks monthly as an inclusive speaking series to engage and stay connected with our community, which is so important in these times right now. So before we dive into tonight's exciting session, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping things with everyone so that we can all watch clearly and any questions are answered. So tonight we have the honor of speaking with Rachel Glover and Renee Leclerc. They're joining us to give us a toolkit on how to be the Askable adult when it comes to talking to children and youth about sexual health or answering any of their questions. So we'll say how to be the cool adult. Things may feel uncomfortable and awkward, but it's crucial that kids receive accurate information in order to keep themselves safe and healthy, and in order to keep others safe and healthy as well. So we're hoping that you come away from this presentation from Rachel and Renee feeling confident and comfortable to answer any sexual health questions that your kiddos may have, whether you're comfortable with it, whether you know the answers, or whether you don't know the answers. Just giving you guys the appropriate tools to use in addressing those questions for them. So this is definitely a safe space for everyone. All are welcome. We welcome any and all questions. At the end of the session, if you do have any questions, we ask that you just type those into the chat, and then we will address them at the end of the session. My amazing co-chair, Rhiannon, will be in charge of moderating tonight's session, and she will go over all of the questions at the end. Our sessions are always recorded, so they can be found on YouTube. We will post this as of tomorrow. If you do not want to be seen on this, then we ask that you turn your cameras off. Otherwise, you will be on the internet as of tomorrow. Also, we have a new feature to our talks, and that is the transcript, live transcript option. So to enable this, you need to do this personally on your computer. It is not 100% accurate, but it is certainly helpful for inclusivity. And then lastly, there are two settings in Zoom. So you have your gallery view or your speaker view. And for tonight's session, we ask that you use your speaker view. So that's it for housekeeping for tonight. But before we get started, I really wanted to send a thanks to Alberta Blue Cross. They are our continuous supporter for these series, and we can't thank them enough. So before we get started, I'm going to throw this over to Ashley, who will send greetings from Blue Cross for us.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here tonight with you all. I can't believe this is our last What the Health talk of this series, but in looking back, we really did cover off some amazing and important topics. Thank you to the Lois Hole Hospital Women's Society for everything you do to make these talks possible. It's been awesome working with you guys again. So thinking about tonight's topic, I couldn't help but flash back to when I was a teen and all the red-faced moments where my own parents tried to talk to me about sexual health. So I am really looking forward to tonight's talk, and I honestly wish something like this existed back then for my parents to attend for sure. Before we get started, I'm just going to take a minute to do a land acknowledgement. Today and every day, we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6 territory. We recognize that the City of Edmonton and us, the people, are beneficiaries of this peace and friendship treaty. Treaty 6 encompasses the traditional territories of numerous Western Canada First Nations, such as the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We are taking this important moment here today to acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, second to get off mute there. Thank you so much, Ashley. That's awesome. Again, we cannot thank Alberta Blue Cross enough for always supporting us in these series. So now to get going on the exciting portion of tonight's event, I get the honor of introducing tonight's amazing speakers. We have this evening Rachel Glover joining us and Renee Leclerc. So Rachel is the YWCA Sexual Wellness Community Educator, is a dynamic advocate for at-risk or marginalized communities, and an experienced sexual health educator. An Honor Society graduate from the York University in sexual health. Rachel has expertise in delivering impactful education and public outreach. Rachel has worked throughout Canada educating people of all ages about sexual health and is joining us remotely from the YWCA as their Sexual Wellness Community Educator. So welcome, Rachel. We're so happy to have you here. We also have Renee. So Renee is a parent and high school science teacher. Her daughter, now an adult, and 20 years of working with teens has taught Renee many valuable lessons about listening and responding to those awkward conversations. So for the past 10 years, Renee has worked as a community coordinator for the LGBTQ+ positive clubs and committees at the school, district, and provincial levels. Renee lives in Edmonton with her husband and daughter and can regularly be found in the River Valley on her bike. So we'll all be looking out for you, Renee, now in the River Valley. So welcome both. I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. As Crystal said, my name is Renee Leclerc, and I am so excited to be here with Rachel tonight. Rachel, as Crystal said, is an expert. I'm just a teacher and a mom who's just collected a lot of experience over the years. And as I said in the chat, I would have given anything to have something like this before I started parenting a teen. So hopefully we can help you navigate some of those conversations. Before we get started, Rachel and I have 4 questions that we're going to be asking you tonight, and we're going to have you ask them through something called a Jamboard. So I'm going to share my screen and show you how to use the Jamboard. Oh, and I need to get the chat back. Okay, so here's the link to the Jamboard. Okay, and here's how you use it. You simply click on the link that I've put in the chat, and when you're ready to put something in the Jamboard, so for example, our first question will be, what questions are you hoping to get answered today, and what are you hoping to hear about today? If you go over on the left-hand side, you'll find what looks like a tiny square with some writing on it. When you click on it, that'll give you a sticky note. You can choose any color that you want, and then you can write on there. I'm just going to say hello and save it. It'll pop your sticky note onto the Jamboard. Then you can click cancel and you can move your sticky note around and change its shape so that you can get it seen. We're going to have 4 questions this evening on page 1, and then to go to the other questions, you go up to the top of the page and click so that you can get to all 4. You are welcome to be writing on the Jamboard at any time on any page throughout the evening, and Rachel and I will be monitoring so that we can respond and answer any questions that you have and share any fun stories that you have. Please know that this is all anonymous, and there we go. So we're starting to see our first questions pop up. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Rachel.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Renee. And thank you everyone for coming today. This is going to be a really, really fun hour. Me and Renee have had so much fun putting this together for everyone. And that's why we wanted to ask this original question on what you're trying to get out of it, because we've prepared this whole presentation so everyone can walk away today feeling confident and comfortable when having these conversations that can be really awkward. Not they can be, like they will be awkward. So that's our drive today. However, we wanted to know what you were hoping to get out of it so we could also structure our conversations to address those particular things. So we're going to give you a minute to throw up anything up on that Jamboard. And then we'll get started with the presentation in just a moment. Perfect. So I'm going to read some aloud as they're popping up here. One of them was where to go for safe and accurate information in the future. Another person wrote how to bring up conversations about diverse sexualities, how to discuss what a healthy sexual relationship is, how to open the lines of communication and approach the subject of sexual health. How do I think, get my children to speak to me about relationships? When is a good age to start talking about sexual health? These are wonderful questions. And even to address that last one, when is a good age to start talking about sexual health? As early as possible. And if you haven't had the conversations yet, it's never too late to start. So when we're talking about the little ones, like our little tiny kiddos, sexual health conversations start by using the proper names for their body parts. So we're not going to use things like a pee-pee. No, we're going to use like vagina, vulva, or a penis. Using the proper terminology for your body parts is a way to empower children. It's how you're educating them from the ground up. And it's actually a huge way to prevent sexual assault or abuse. I know that's kind of dark, but to be fair, people target kids that don't know how to talk about their sexual health. So if they don't have the language and they're using nicknames for their body parts, that can sometimes target them because it shows that they may not have this education, or they may not have a trusted or askable adult in their life. So when kids are empowered with education, with names of their body parts and the science behind them and how they work, they're going to be able to stay safer and healthier and be able to talk about themselves and what's going on in their life. So you want to start these conversations as early as possible. And if you haven't yet, it is never too late to start. And I'm going to read a couple more of these before we get our presentation going. So another one says, my daughter is expressing same-sex attraction. Any suggestion for how to address this? How to address the question about when is a good time to start being sexually active? Absolutely. And Renee, I'm sure this is bringing a smile to your face because our presentation is addressing all of this. So
for sure.
Yeah, we're all on the same page here. That being said, I want to bring everyone back to the Zoom presentation, and we're going to get started here. So our topic today, right, is when it gets awkward talking to teens about sexual health. Renee's and my email is listed on the bottom here, and this will be in the recording as well. So if anybody wants to reach out to either of us with any questions or comments, or you want more resources at the end of this, reach out to either myself or Renee, and we are happy to talk to you further. So our learning objectives for all of our attendees is by the end of this presentation, you're going to be able to identify safe resources to access sexual health information for you and your kiddos. You're going to be able to be the askable adult in young people's lives, whether they're your own young people or other young people around you. And you're also going to be able to demonstrate comfort and confidence when answering sexual health questions. And it's pretty straightforward how we're doing this. We actually took out the overview of puberty. We were wondering if that was something people want to know, and we have it in our back pocket in case those questions come up. But for now, we push that to the bottom of the presentation. We're going to jump right into answering questions and then give you a bunch of safe resources. So as we go into this next step, I want to know from each and every one of you, where did you learn about sexual health? So I want to invite you back to our Jamboard. There'll be a new question up. If you go to the top where it says 1 out of 4, click the next frame, and you're going to see, where did you learn about sexual health? Whatever that may be. Maybe you didn't learn, maybe you did. Who taught you? These are the kind of answers we're looking for.
While people are doing that on the Jamboard, I'll just take a moment and talk about where I learned about sexual health. So I'm from the farm, and as all farm kids, I learned about sexual health there, watching the animals and working with my parents. But I also had really progressive parents for the late 70s and 80s and into the 90s. I remember we spent hours and hours in the car, and mom and dad would be talking. And in retrospect, they were talking about topics that they thought that I needed to hear, but wasn't comfortable enough to sit and have a face-to-face conversation. And so I would listen to them talking about people they knew or situations they had heard about. And I learned so much by just listening to them talk to each other about sexual health.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these answers that are coming up are very common, you know, just from friends like that, you know, that's where you've learned them from, just from talking to your friends about it. Sex ed class, sort of. So maybe that was like a one day dedicated to. We'll get to that shortly. But that being said, let's talk about a couple skills, a couple ways that we can be Askable adults, whether it's to our children or to other children, to other youth in the community. So it's really important to be honest. You want to give factual information. There's a huge difference between facts and values. So facts are like the scientifically proven, this is how the body works, this is what that is. And then we have values that come into play. Values are super important, and you learn values in the family, right? You as a family are going to instill your values into your children. But when they come asking you about sexual health information, it's vitally important that you answer them honestly and scientifically, and then you can open up the conversation saying, so as a family, this is what we believe, but you still want to give them that honest information. So for example, we're going to both, me and Renee will be using examples throughout this entire lesson. But for an example, let's say your kiddo comes to you asking what abortion is. That might make you right now in your stomach, you might be like, oh God, that sounds awful. So it's important not to assume that this is something they want to do. They're just curious. What is that? They heard the word. And some people are against abortion and some people are for abortion. Whatever your stance is, you can tell them what an abortion is, that it's terminating a pregnancy. That is the accurate factual answer. And then you can open up a conversation about maybe what that means to you and to your family. So it's important to always be honest, deliver the facts, and then you can have a conversation about values that follows up from that. You also want to remain judgment-free or shame-free. So kind of like I just said, if your kiddo asks you about abortion, don't assume that they're going to get one or that they're pregnant or that their friends are. It's about putting those judgments away. Kids hear stuff everywhere, online, in TV, at school, from their friend's sister or brother. So it's really common for them to hear things and want to ask questions about it. So it's just to remain judgment-free, shame-free. Just because they ask us a question doesn't mean that they're engaging in those activities or that they're going to do those things. They're just curious and they want the answers. And they may not know who else to ask. So coming to you is a great thing. Finally, being encouraging. So positive reinforcements, saying, thank you so much for asking me. You can always ask me any question again. Just those small positive reinforcements shows that the door is always open. That being said, I'm going to pass this off to Renee. Oh, there we go.
as parents, we know that no matter how much of an expert we are on a subject, we are in the parenting box, and sometimes our kids will not accept the advice, even if we're an expert. My husband and I, we met our daughter when she was 1 month shy of her 13th birthday. She had been in foster care her entire life, and I have her permission to speak here about her today. And so we met her, and then we adopted her. We are both teachers. We are both science teachers. We have taught everything. But when she was in school, and she'd only known us a few months, and we sat down to try and help her with her schoolwork, our expertise didn't matter because we were in the parent box already. And teenagers, they just seem to be hardwired to push us away as parents. So it hurts when they push us away, but we're going to teach you how to get clever about that tonight. So try not to let it hurt you. My daughter's now in her 20s, and she always says, Mom, I'm so glad that you kept pushing. I'm so glad that you kept being there, even when I pushed you away. They appreciate that we're there, but we have to remember not to be overly hurt when we're not their chosen Askable adult in that moment.
Yes, thank you so much. Because it could hurt our feelings, right? When we're like, we want to help, we're here, and we know the information, but yeah, they may not always choose to come to us. So that being said, let's talk about how to answer questions. These questions come up, whatever they may be. And this is what you see on the screen right now seems like a pretty simple formula, right? We're going to normalize and validate their question. We're going to answer it. We're going to check in. But obviously, there's a lot more that goes into each one of these steps. So we're going to dive into those. Starting with number 1, normalize and validate. This is saying stuff like, yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people your age ask this. I'm sure you're curious about this. Of course, this is a great question. So it's kind of, again, celebrating that they asked you. And one of the main things we want to do is control our face. We don't want to put shame on our kids just for asking us. And that happens in our face. That is the first thing that happens when they ask us that question and we go like, oh, or like, oh, like, why are you asking? Like that shock can show all over our body. So it's important to practice controlling your face and reaction. I know, Renee, you said something about, you have some tips here.
So every once in a while, we know that our kids are going to catch us off guard. And one of my favorite things that I like to do is I control my face really well, but sometimes I just need a moment to collect myself. So one of the things that I'll often say is, this sounds like a really important conversation, but I have to go pee first. And then I go into the bathroom and I shut the door and I collect myself. Sometimes I'm Googling the answer because I don't know the answer, but I take that moment to collect myself, and then I come out and we sit down and we chat. My daughter is just very aware that I have to go to the bathroom quite often.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. So yeah, it's about controlling your face and reaction, because looking shocked or appalled puts shame on that. It almost shows them like, oh, I said something wrong. I shouldn't have asked that. And that might take some practicing, because we'll talk a little bit later, but they don't always ask us these questions at the most opportune times. So as I already mentioned, we're going to validate their curiosity and question. Like, of course you're wondering this. That's a great question. Thank you for asking me. Sometimes if you're confused about what they're asking, you can also ask them to clarify. So I'm going to share a little story. There was this one kid that went home to his mom and asked her what sex was. And she was like, oh, okay. Talked about what sex was. And he was like, oh, and looked really kind of disturbed. And the mom said, what's wrong? And she was like, well, our music teacher said we're going to be playing the sex next week. So he meant sax, and that was a very awkward conversation that could have been avoided. It's not harmful for kids to learn this information at any age. They only take in what they can, but sometimes just clarifying the question. Like, sorry, can you just clarify, is this what you're asking me? Are you asking me what this is? Or even saying, that's really interesting. Where did you hear that? If you're kind of surprised that they're asking something, you can say, oh, I heard about it at school, or I saw it online. So just sometimes if you want to clarify, you can do that. Clarify what they're even asking you. Thank them for asking you. Great. Like I said, great question. Thank you so much for asking me. And if you want to even open up a bigger conversation, or even buy yourself some time, ask them what they think the answer is. So what do you think the answer is? I'm so curious to see what you think. And you can also see where your kiddo is at that point in time, because they could be like, I don't know anything at all, or okay, well, I heard it was this. So again, these are ways to have like conversation starters to even not, prolong the conversation a little bit. So that is how we normalize and validate their question. The next step is answering the question. So we want to be direct, factual, and generalized. Short and sweet does the trick. You don't need to give a big explanation. Shorter is more. So sometimes people think they need to over-explain things, especially if we're a little nervous. We can really explain things and go off on a long tangent. But truthfully, especially in my experience when I'm in schools answering anonymous questions all the time, all day, short and sweet is exactly what they're looking for, even a yes or no answer. Sometimes it's yes or no. If they have more questions, they're going to ask you more questions. They'll ask you to explain more. But most of the time, they just need that cut and dry answer to what it is. So it's direct, it is honest, factual, and generalized. So we're not going to say, well, for you, it's like this. We can say for most people, right? We're generalizing it. Well, for most people, this is what that is. Most of the time. We're also not going to make assumptions. So I've already stepped on that before, but it's about not assuming our kids are doing these things when they ask us. We're not going to assume that. And we're not going to assume their friends are doing these things. Like I said, kids will hear about this stuff anywhere, all the time. No matter where they go, these things are all around them, these words, they can overhear conversations. So we're not going to assume that this is stuff that they're engaging in. It's also okay to not know the answer. And I know that's where a lot of discomfort can stem from, is being like, well, I don't know the answer. And I don't know if I'm up to date, or if I don't want to say the wrong thing. And that's okay, because when we don't know the answer, it is a wonderful opportunity to model how to find the answer. So you can say, oh, wow, that's a great question. And I don't think I know. Let's look it up together. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you, me and Renee have compiled a ton of resources for you. One of them is a hotline that I personally use all the time. Like if I don't know an answer and I'm in front of a classroom, I will literally take my cell phone out and call the hotline on speakerphone to show them, like, this is a safe hotline. There are healthcare practitioners, sexual healthcare practitioners on the other end, and I can ask them any question and they're right there on the other line and answer them. And I say, okay, thanks, bye, and hang up. So you can practice how to find the safe answers. And then your kids know in the future, if you're not around or they don't know who to ask, or if they're too shy to ask, they know how to find the safe, accurate answers on their own. So it's totally okay not to ask. And being real builds trust. So, being authentic, being real, even to being like, oh, that made me a little uncomfortable. You might have seen that. It's just because I don't talk about this often, but thank you for asking me. Like, it's okay to own your feelings, or to own that you may not know the answers. It's building trust by even saying that, by admitting, yeah, I don't know that, but let's find out together.
Rachel, do you mind if I add a couple of things here?
Please do.
Awesome. So modeling how to find the answer using the resources that Rachel has compiled, or just showing your child that the answers are not on Facebook, they're not on Reddit, how to look is really important, especially in this day and age where our kids are being bombarded by misinformation all of the time. Seeing us go through the learning process is an incredible experience for your child. I also just wanted to touch on don't make assumptions. So here's a story from back in the day when I first started teaching. I had a grade 8 class and I had this young human, and he would come in every day for about a week in the middle of the year, and he would tell jokes about people 69ing. And I'd get upset with him and I'd say, stop that, you can't say that here. And he wouldn't say it again for the rest of the day. And then the next day he'd come in with a new joke. And so one day I finally pulled him out in the hallway and I said, I'm frustrated that you keep bringing these jokes to class. So I need to ask you, do you know what 69ing is? And you know how when kids are going to be really honest with you and they're shy and they get really tiny and they look a lot younger? He did that. And he goes, you know what, Mrs. L, I actually don't know what that means. And so I just gave him the facts. This is what it is. And it was about a 20-second explanation. And his poor little mouth, it fell open. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that's what that was, Mrs. Leclerc. All of my older brothers, they always tell these jokes and all of them laugh and all of their friends laugh. And so I laugh along, but I didn't really know what it was. So I just thought I'd come here and tell jokes that make the older boys laugh. When we take those moments and just set our assumptions aside and answer things, it can give our kids a lot more confidence. That young man had the chance to go home, hear those jokes, but know that they aren't appropriate in school anymore and to know why. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And then Renee, I know we talked about this next tip together. I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on that one a bit as well, the last one on the list.
Right. So our kids are going to ask us questions that challenge our values on the regular. As open and as wide as I try to make the circle of inclusion in our home, my daughter can still surprise me. So one day she was asking me a question about oral sex, and she used really crass language, and my face changed. It changed so fast. And I am very practiced at holding my face. Like I say, sometimes I have to go to the bathroom and collect myself, but I am very practiced. And that day, what I found was that crass language bumped up against the values that I have. When I talk about sexual health, it is very scientific, it is very clinical. And when she used that language, it was so surprising. And so I had to really think about why it upset me, why it sent me spinning a bit, and explain that to her and just say, that is not language that I am comfortable with using. And we're going to talk a little bit later about the difference between setting boundaries within these conversations versus shutting those conversations down. And so I needed to address why I had such a big reaction and then set a boundary and say, when you and I are talking together, we're going to speak using the technical terms. And so that's what I wanted to be able to say here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And we will touch upon this more shortly. So our next step, we've normalized and validated their question. We've answered their question, either whether we knew the answer ourselves or we had to show them how to look it up together. And our final step is to check in. So ask them, did that answer your question? They might say, well, no, actually, I think I wanted to find this out. Or they'll say, yeah, that really did. Thank you. You can even ask them, what do you think about that? And, again, open up that conversation more. But at the end, thank them for coming to you. Say, again, leave that door open for this ongoing conversation throughout their life. Thank you for asking me. You can always ask me any question whenever. Having that door open doesn't mean they're always going to feel like they can come to you. As we already said, sometimes that you may not be their chosen Askable adult, but there are some tips and tricks that can encourage your kiddo to come to you. So Renee, would you like to share? Oops, sorry. So here's some tips and tricks from Renee.
Okay, so our kids don't always feel comfortable walking right up and saying, Mom, Dad, grandparent, whoever you are to the child in your life. They don't always feel comfortable just walking up and asking a question. My daughter used to send us texts. I get texts all the time with all sorts of questions. She has terrible tonsils. She texts me pictures that she takes down her throat to ask me about her tonsils. Text is a great low risk way for kids to be able to ask questions without having to feel embarrassed. Some kids email, I don't know, not a lot of kids are going to use email. Notes, we would find notes in the house. our daughter, when she came out as a member of the LGBTQ2+ community in grade 9, she just left us a note and said, I am blank, and I don't want to talk about it. I'm going for a walk. And so my husband and I, we've been running GSAs forever. We're like, oh man, what do we do? Well, she left us a note because she didn't want to talk. So we honored that. And instead, we bombed the house with rainbows. We put up all of the GSA posters. We put up all of the rainbow flags. We made sure that she knew that we loved her for who she was. But that note allowed her to talk to us. You can even get really creative. I have a friend who uses a signal magnet, and they have mom, dad, and then the kid can come in, they can take the magnet, put it wherever they want, mom, dad, or both. And that way the parents know that the child wants to talk to them one-on-one or together. Because sometimes it's hard to get mom or dad one-on-one, or sometimes it's hard to get us together. So get creative. And sometimes the kids find the way to these signals themselves. And sometimes you have to sit down and talk about it and say, okay, if you want to talk to me, this is what we can do. And if you want to talk to dad, or what do you think we should do to try and keep those lines of communication open?
Yeah, absolutely. And you just reminded me of stuff. I know we talked a bit about what I did when I was younger. My parents never spoke to me about this stuff, and neither did my school. So I kind of had to hunt down the information myself, which led me to becoming a sexual health educator. But I remember I used to write in my diary being like, I wish mom and dad would talk to me about this, about sex, what that means, what that is. And I'd leave my diary on their bed. And my parents were so respectful that they replaced it. They wouldn't read it and they'd bring it back to me. But I just wish I had these tips, like that sign or some way to be like, I need to talk, or so that's why it's sometimes even good to have this like text. Sometimes people can be so uncomfortable, especially the kiddos. They just don't even want to like show face while they ask this. So saying you can text me your questions, having these different ways, these mediums of answering their questions can be really helpful, as Renee mentioned. So next, we're going to put up a couple questions that are very common with youth. These are questions that will test you. So read these questions in your head, and maybe in your head, try to think about how you would answer them, especially using the 3 points. So to normalize and validate, answer the question, and check in. The first question is, what does sex feel like? The second is, when can I lose my virginity? And the third is, what is anal? Yeah, these are very difficult questions. But I, just for the sake of this, and me and Renee will give you an example of how we would answer them. And it's different for everyone. So of course, as parents, you also have your values that you want to talk about. So as a sexual health teacher, when I get the question, like, what does sex feel like? I say, oh, thank you so much for asking me that. Of course, that's a very common question. It feels different for all people. Everyone has different bodies. Everyone has different preferences. Everyone likes to be touched in different ways. So it feels different for all people. And then, did that answer your question? It doesn't need this big explanation. Just saying that, well, it's different for all people. Everyone feels different ways. People feel pleasure in different ways. So it's different for all people. That would be my 1-sentence answer. And then I check in with them. Renee, would you like to give a shot at one of the questions?
All right. So how about I give a shot at, when can I lose my virginity? So again, I would start off with, that is an excellent question. It is different for everyone, but I need you to understand that you're not losing anything. You're not giving anything away. You're not losing anything. What I always think of when people are talking about having sex for the first time is, I think about a person's safety. And so I want the people who are going to be involved to make sure that they are comfortable talking to their partner, their doctor, and hopefully a trusted adult about their genital region, that they know what is going on down there and how it's changing. Because if you can't do that, then you may not be ready simply because you're not going to be able to keep yourself safe if you need to go to a doctor. And then I would follow it up with, does that answer your question? And the answer is going to be, no, I want a date. And so then we would talk more about how it's up to each person's psychology. We talk a lot about how we feel when we're teenagers, like everybody's having sex because the movies tell us that they are. But Rachel, I think you have some stats on that.
Absolutely. So there's been a lot of studies on high school students in particular, and 75% of high school students are not sexually active. So only 25% of students become sexually active during high school, but 75% don't. And those numbers are huge. However, youth feel like everyone is doing it. Everyone's kind of talking about sex, or maybe saying they are, but the facts are that they're not. And that's something we try to do in the schools, is to break down that myth, being like, don't feel the pressure. You have the rest of your, if there's no timeline here, there's no pressure to do this. You have the rest of your life to engage in these activities when you want to, and everyone else isn't. So don't feel that way. But unfortunately, it is what is felt by youth constantly. I hear that all the time, where they think everyone else is doing this but them. But yeah, research has been done, and that's not the case. And then, okay, the last question, what is anal? See, this is one of the questions that might get your face like, what did you just ask me? So we're going to control our face and say, thank you for asking me that. Anal is when people engage sexually with an anus. Does that answer your question? So that's how I would answer just that. I'm not going to give any more information than that unless they have more questions, but typically that's going to be enough for them. Whenever I answer questions like this, they typically don't follow up with more. They're like, oh, that's what that is. Okay, thank you. And so yeah, validate, answer the question, thank them for asking you. And it's really that simple, even though it's not that simple. It really is that simple. That being said, we're going to have a look, and we're going to kind of discuss now the times when the kids ask us and what that means exactly.
Okay, so we know that our kids, from the time that they can talk, they are going to ask us the craziest questions at the most inopportune times. My daughter has asked me some of the biggest questions imaginable in some of the heaviest traffic that requires my attention that I've ever seen. They just have a really strong sense of when our attention is split. And in their minds, they're like, this is a good time to ask something embarrassing because mom and dad won't notice my embarrassment. So what you're looking at on the screen here is something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is part of the base training when you're becoming a teacher. It's the idea that students cannot learn until their basic needs have been met. So right at the bottom, we have the the physiological needs. So air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, that sort of thing. And so the same thing goes for a parent. If you are hungry, if you are thirsty, if you are sleepy, that isn't the best time to answer the really big questions. And so what I will often do is say to my child or to my students, you know what, that's a really great question. Can we go and get something to eat? And then we'll talk after we eat. So if it's a big question that's going to be longer than that single sentence, than that short answer, that's often what I will do is I'll say, let's go get something to eat. Let's go get something to drink. Sometimes it's, I need to take a nap because I feel like my brain just isn't working right now. The key point here is that you make a time. If you're going to delay the conversation, you need to make sure that you make a time to have that conversation. So if you're in the car and you're in some wicked traffic or on black ice and your kid asks you a great question that's going to require a fairly nuanced answer, I will always say, that's a great question. I want to discuss that, but I want to be able to give you my full attention. Can we talk about it when we get home after we've eaten at 6 o'clock. Teenagers are usually really good as long as you tell them that there's a definitive follow-up. Now, let's say that you get home and the dog has pooped on the rug and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't sit here and have this conversation with my child with poop on the rug. So the way that you handle that, or the way that you could handle that, is just saying to your child, I know that I said we'd talk at 6. It is now 5:57 and there's poop on the rug. So I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to take a moment to collect myself because I'm upset. And can we get together at 6:30? So delaying the conversation requires some sort of follow-up. It isn't just our psychological needs that need to be met. In the next level from the bottom, the safety needs. Are you personally safe? That's why I can't talk while I'm driving on black ice. Our lives are in danger. My brain is keeping us alive. And so that isn't the time for me to talk about that, but I have enough brain power to talk through, this is the plan. Am I feeling well? So sometimes kids will come and they want to talk to you while you have the flu. That isn't the best time to talk. And so while you're sick, it's okay to say, can we talk about this tomorrow if I'm feeling better? Love and belonging, that's what all of you are attending to right now. You have children in your lives that you care about, and your children are going to feel that. So making sure that your child, it feels loved and belongs. For us, that was a challenge because my daughter was very new to our family, and it took time. While she is biologically wired to push away from the adults who care for her, she was also trying to build connections that most of you have been building with your child since they were very, very young. And so we struggled a little bit at that love and belonging. If there's been a breakdown in the family unit, or if your child and you have recently had a fight, which they're going to happen, that love and belonging, that needs to be repaired a little bit in order for some of these conversations to happen. That allows you to get into the kind of the esteem part of things and the self-actualization. That's where all of the learning happens. But taking care of especially those bottom two and attending to that love and belonging as much as you can, it's going to make all of these conversations a lot easier. Okay.
Right on, absolutely.
So we would love you to go back to the Jamboard because we want to know who is your child's team. So who are the people in your child's life that kind of takes care of them, nurtures them? So everybody, I'm going to have you just pop back into the Jamboard, and in case you can't find the link, there it is. Who is your child's team? Yeah. Aunt and teacher. Mom and dad, absolutely. Siblings, friends, coach. Aunts and uncles, for sure. Mom mostly, but close friends, absolutely. Sometimes the team is bigger than we realize. There's a lot of pressure on us grandparents for sure. Oh, grandparents, they're clever as a part of your team. I'm gonna talk about them. The team that supports your child is often people that you didn't even think about. So mom and dad for sure. For us, we were new parents to a teenager, so we were just Renee and Andrew for a while. Then we became mom and dad. We had a social worker as part of our team for a while until the adoption was finalized. Your family members, whether they be family that is blood family or family of the heart, because we were a family that was building. We talked about families don't just have to be related by blood. They're related through choice and through your heart. Your friends, their friends, your friends of friends, can all be part of the team. Some of you mentioned teachers, coaches. I used the doctor. When my kid was exploring her own pathway into sexual activity, I went to the doctor and I was like, okay, she doesn't want to hear what I have to say. Are you okay having some chats with her? And the doctor was like, oh, nobody's ever asked me if I could chat with their child before. Do I have to tell you what we're chatting about? Because I can't. And I was like, absolutely not, 100%. Whatever you two talk about, that is totally confidential. Our doctor was fully on board. She was like, yep, I will have some chats with your daughter. And you know, my daughter felt a lot more settled after having that chat with such an incredible professional. We had counselors. Our daughter is gay and she dates girls. And when she first started dating girls, she wanted to talk to my husband a lot because I don't have any experience dating girls. My husband does. So they talked, but a homosexual relationship is different from a heterosexual relationship. So we found an amazing counselor. His name is Corey. He does work with youth living on the street in downtown Edmonton. And I remember going to the first meeting, and Corey just said, I'm a member of the community too. I date both men and women. Would you like to talk with me? All of a sudden, we had this new person in our team. I left that room feeling confident that my daughter had somebody new to talk to. And over the years, every once in a while, she'd be like, I'm going to text Corey and just ask him a question, which was absolutely amazing. Then there's community members. And this was an interesting one. Our local convenience store is Ralph's. They have some of the best chicken in Edmonton. And they have some of the greatest people working there. And they are all members of the same family. And we went in there a lot. My husband and I used to walk a lot when my daughter wasn't feeling connected to us and was needed some time alone. And so we'd walk in there and one of the people that works there, his name is Wally. Wally would be like, how's it going today? Go, you know, this is happening at home. He goes, you know, the next time she comes in here to buy a bag of chips, maybe I'll just chat about something. And he was so great. He talked to her about all sorts of things. The community can get behind you and your child as well. So when your kiddo doesn't want to listen to you, sometimes you need to get your community, your team behind you. Our daughter, she couldn't tie her shoes when she came to us. And she did not want to learn. So in grade 10, she decided that she wanted to play rugby. And if you have your shoelaces flapping around on a rugby field, you're going to trip on them and break your nose. So we were on her constantly about tying her shoelaces, tying them up, and she simply would not listen. And so finally, my husband went to one of the coaches and said, look, we haven't known our daughter our entire lives. So we didn't get to teach her all of the fundamentals. And the one that we're struggling with right now is shoelaces. Could you please help us? And don't you know it, in the middle of the next game, all of a sudden the coach was like, you're off, come over here, sit on the ground. And she had my daughter's feet in her lap, showing her how to tie her shoes. And they did it over and over again until she knew how to tie her shoes. She was 16 years old. Your community, your team, all you have to do is get clever. My parents got clever and they talked in the front of the car because they knew that I wouldn't listen to them sitting on a couch. So they just talked and I listened. They got clever. They used to have neighbors come over and they would talk and I'd be listening around the corner. So we got clever with our daughter. Her foods teacher was amazing. Our daughter was having a really tough time in high school to the point where we were worried about her life. And so we called the teachers at school and the foods teacher had her every single morning. And I said, Jody, I'm worried. Can you help her hear this message that she is valuable and loved and connected? Jody said, absolutely, Renee. And she would call us every morning that our daughter didn't arrive at school on time to make sure that she was healthy and safe. You have so many people who can be resources and supports to your children that when I thought about this, I had no idea that those resources would be there, but they're there. All you have to do is reach out and be creative. And on the first page of our Jamboard, I saw somebody said, my daughter is expressing same-sex attraction. Any suggestions for how to address this? Well, through all of the things that I've mentioned, but one more. So my husband and I, we have been working with 2S LGBTQ youth for years and years and years. Our daughter comes out and has a sleepover. There's supposed to be a bunch of girls there, but all of a sudden, most of the girls go home except for one. And it turns out it's the girl that our daughter is interested in. And just as we don't have co-ed sleepovers because of heterosexual interactions between our teenagers, we had to think deeply about what does it mean for a child to be attracted to a same-sex person and sleepovers. And my husband and I, we went through the Rolodex of all the answers in our brains and we had nothing. And so we reached out to parents who were experts and we went to a PFLAG meeting. And there are several of them here in Edmonton, and Rachel is going to share those resources with you. And we asked the question, what do? We listened to everybody as they talked, and it was exactly that. How do we talk to our kid who is showing interest in the same sex? But then we asked the question, what do you do for a sleepover? And a parent looked me straight in the eye and said, we've come across that. My child is trans. And what I do is I talk to the parents and I say, I need you to understand that my daughter has a penis. How do we deal with that at your house? And some parents are like, this is what we'll do. We'll do a sleepover and it'll be out in a public area. Some parents are like, I'm not entirely comfortable with that. Okay, so we'll pick our daughter up at midnight. What you can do if your child is showing same-sex attraction is number one, talk. Number two, reach out if you don't know the answers, just like we did. So that brings us to getting creative. So I've told you a few ways that I've gotten creative. On the Jamboard, I want to hear some of your creative stories because I guarantee you, every single parent in this room has gotten creative with a way to deliver a message to your child that they didn't want to hear. And for those of you who have been parenting since they were babies, you darn right that you have gotten creative. So again, let's go to the Jamboard. I want to hear a couple of your creative ideas, and then I'm going to share a couple of mine.
I'll even share one that happened to me recently. There was a parent, while people are writing theirs, there was a parent that reached out to their teacher with a concern about their kiddo. And the teacher reached out to me to deliver a lesson with this whole secret message behind it. So I am going to this classroom to teach about healthy relationships, which I am, but there's a whole other underlying message about bullying, about being kind, about friendship, about, if your friend says the wrong thing. In this situation, the kiddo had said something racist and didn't even know what it meant. And he is being severely bullied now for that, even though he's learned and he's grown. So that's the underlying topic there, is me trying to share, like, do we just write people off if they said something mean? No, we can have conversations. Just, if people say the wrong thing, that doesn't mean they're bad people. So I'm being brought into this classroom to have this entire lesson for their whole class under this disguise of healthy relationship that's really addressing bullying that's happening in the classroom. So that was a very creative way. The parent and the teacher are teaching a lesson to the kids that don't want to hear it?
As a teacher, 100%, I get this a lot. And there are so many parents that don't know that they can reach out to us and that we can be under the radar on your behalf. And so when I talk to parents and they're like, Renee, I'm at my wit's end. What do I do? I'm like, you know what? Surprisingly enough, tomorrow's lesson is going to be on menstruation and how to use tampons. Interesting how that works, hey? And they're like, oh, thank goodness, because I didn't know how to approach that. So it happens all the time. Leave them a note about something great they did. Yeah. Talked with school counselors and they've brought up with the child. Yep, for sure. For sure. We had a new restaurant open up in our community right near the beginning of our parenting. And it's a great place called Juniper. And it is run by 3 people who collectively have raised, I think, 12 teenagers. They are the most wonderful people to talk to. So sometimes it's just your local restaurant too. Yeah, I've spoken about topics as if not knowing for them, knowing they're listening and absorbing. Oh, that is probably the biggest tool for the parent out there. I called my dad. My dad is a rough, tough dog trainer, from the old school where the dog has to listen. And that was a bit of his parenting style. But as a grandpa, he looks a little bit like the grandpa from Up. He's kind of small and he looks like the grandpa from Up. My daughter just loves him. And so sometimes it's, Grandpa, we need you to say this, to find a way to talk about this. He's like, oh, I want to say it like this. And I'm like, no, Dad, I need you to be kindly old grandpa. He's like, okay. And then he delivers the message. Grandparents, they are absolute gold. And if you do not have grandparents that you can access, there are many, many older folks probably in your life who would love to be asked. Now, sometimes we take their advice and sometimes we're like, it's not quite what I want to do, but they are an absolute treasure trove of learning for us as parents. Okay, so let me tell you about a couple of things that we did as parents. So I told you about photobombing, about bombing the house with rainbows. One day our daughter was angry at us because all of her friends knew that she was adopted because she doesn't look anything like us. And we're not her real parents. And we never do anything for it. You know how teenagers rage, right? So my husband and I, we went to the local drugstore and we printed off about 400 photos of us as a family. And we had only been together about 3 years. And we put them up all over the house. We photobombed the entire house. And then we invited her friends over who didn't know that she was adopted. And her friends were like, whoa, what's going on in your house? And once the shock wore off, they started looking at all the photos and they were like, wow, you look so much like your mom and dad. That was one of our parenting wins. We don't always win, but that was one of them. We'll often find television shows with a message. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a big one for us to be able to see healthy LGBTQ2+ representation on the screen. Lots of different television shows give us the opportunity as a family to sit down and to talk. And it makes my daughter crazy because my husband and I like to stop shows all the time and chat about what's happening in them and look stuff up on the internet. It makes her crazy, but she secretly loves it. And so we found lots and lots of TV shows. Pro parenting tip. If you have a child who is raging, we've done 2 things. Number 1, our daughter was raging in her bedroom one time. She was just having a real bad day. So we turned on the Jackson 5 and blasted it through her wall to help her to make the choice to come out and reconnect with the family. When she's stomping around the house and being upset, I used to put on Bob Ross There is something special about Bob Ross that gets people to calm down, and she would calm down and then start to chat with me. The other big thing that we as parents always want to do is we want to look our child in the eye. I'm bad for this as a teacher too. We want to look a kid in the eye. It makes them uncomfortable. The way that our society has worked for thousands of years is that we talk while we're working. So finding a project to do with your child, being shoulder to shoulder, getting them in the car and driving when it's safe for you to do so and to talk, it does wonders for building those conversations. So those are my get creative strategies.
Oh, and they're brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for sharing yours. It's such a great way to get lessons across without, having that sit down and the awkwardness, right? These are ways to share information with trying to avoid that awkwardness that will often be there.
Yeah.
So that being said, I know we're going a little over time, so we just have actually 2 slides left that we want to talk about. They're very important, and then we'll get everyone's question. So we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries now. Boundaries are very important. We kind of mentioned them earlier as well when we're talking about, facts versus values. And, when kiddos ask us those questions that go right against our values, it can be really challenging. And I know, Renee, you said you had some wonderful insights here.
Well, I think I've pretty much shared them all, but yeah, setting your boundaries without shutting a conversation down is a skill that we learn as parents through trial and error. And so just saying, this is what this thing is. Does that make sense to you? And then following up with, this is how I feel here. We're talking about we're talking about sex for the first time. I would prefer if people waited, or I understand that people are going to make that choice for themselves, or I would prefer that you talk to me about it, or I would prefer that it not happen under my roof, right? So it's okay to share your values, but also have your boundaries. And for me, the boundary is always, I would like us to use appropriate language while we're talking about this. So that's pretty much the only advice that I had there. Other than that, we've talked about most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have gone over these throughout our presentation, and that's the same with our last slide about remembering diversity. So we've already talked about the not making assumptions about why they're asking us those questions. It's very often as well for people to make assumptions that their kid is heterosexual or cisgendered, or that all of their friends identify like that. So just remember diversity. Remember that no matter what people look like, they can identify and feel in all of these different ways. And to just be open and accepting of that when we can be. So if they are bringing friends around that maybe you aren't familiar with, or you're not sure what they identify as, that's okay, because we don't need to know what people identify as, just to respect them. And, we have the same rules in our house, regardless of who you are or what you identify as. So it's just important to always remember diversity, especially when it comes to our kiddos themselves. Because they can change, they grow into their identity. They're finding out, especially through puberty, when puberty happens, that's the onset for some folks of sexual feelings and desires. That begins in puberty. So they're also navigating who they like, who they're attracted to, who they want to date. And there's a lot of different ways people can feel about that. So we have to give that special note about remembering that diversity.
And one of the things that I do, because there are so many youth who are exploring who they are as a person with a gender, they're exploring, are they gender non-binary? Are they gender fluid? Are they trans? One of the things that I do is I'll often talk about people who have a uterus and people who have testicles. And so if my daughter is asking me about menstruation, I will talk about people who have a uterus will often bleed from their uterus out of their vagina. And so we're taking the gender piece out of it, because there are men in our society who have a uterus and do bleed out of their vagina. And so I just try as much as possible to be really respectful of all of that diversity. And again, that'll come down to your values, but just keep in mind that your children have diverse friendship groups that you want to make sure that you're including as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So that being said, this is our resource sheet, and I have plenty more for you. They're going to be emailed out to everyone, so you don't even have to worry about writing these down quickly. We want to get to everyone's questions now, but there's a couple I do just want to share a little bit about. The options for Sexual Health BC hotline. That is the number I use when I'm in a classroom, and I'll call it in front of everyone. They are wonderful experts on the other line, and they are located in BC, but they'll answer anyone's call no matter where you are in the world. So that's one I love. PFLAG, which is peer support surrounding 2S LGBTQ plus, is what Renee was talking about, that support group where she was able to get some wonderful answers that she was struggling about. And the rest of them is listed there. There's one near the bottom that says info and live chat. So it's yoursexlife.com. is targeted towards teens and youth. They have Planned Parenthood has a live chat on that website, and there's tons of great information. And these are all safe resources. So we're going to email these out to you after. Tons of wonderful, up-to-date, safe resources. And it's important to have this accessible to your teens or to your kids. I recommend printing this list out, laminating it, having it on your fridge. So, they know where to go for safe information if they don't go to you about it. And then if you don't know the answer to a question, you can just go to your lovely resource sheet and choose one of the options to find the answer. So yes, well, tons of great resources, have them accessible. Did you want to add anything there, Renee?
If any of you are looking for safe spaces for LGBTQ youth to find community and feel loved and supported, please email me. There are many, many support groups and community groups around the Edmonton area. We are also working with ISMIS to expand their support groups throughout the summer, because we know that LGBTQ2 youth are particularly lonely during the summer. And if your child is not a member of the community, but an ally, they are also welcome in those spaces.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we will open it up to any questions or comments now. And thank you all for joining us today. You're already taking this big step just by showing up and learning today and this evening. The kids and youth in your life are lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. Oh, thanks so much, Renee and Rachel. For those of you on this talk that don't know me, my name is Rhiannon Adams. I'm a supporter of the Louisville Hospital Women's Society and the co-chair of the Development Committee with Crystal. I am going to be the moderator for the question and answer portion. So if you have questions, please stick them in the chat. I will say them out loud, and then we'll have some answers. There was one that I noticed on the very first page of the Jamboard that I think you may not have seen it, but it was specifically about, do you speak differently to sons and daughters about when they have questions? And I thought that was a really interesting question. So should we? Maybe not, but do we? Probably. I mean, I don't know.
So that's very interesting. I say no. So when I've even gone to classrooms and they're like, oh, we're going to separate the girls and boys. And I say, no, girls and boys need to know the same information about each other. People should know about all different bodies. And so I absolutely don't think you should talk to whether they're a boy or a girl or non-binary, whatever their gender is, deliver the exact same information.
And also, boys are very curious. Boys and people with uteruses are curious about people with testicles, and people with testicles are curious about people with uteruses. And it even comes down to, I was teaching comm recently, and I was talking about menstruation, and the boys in the class, the people who identify as male, they were like, wait a second, what are all these products? Because I actually brought the products in and they were interested and they were looking, and I was talking to the people who do menstruate, and I said, and if clots come out, that's okay. And the people who don't menstruate were like, what is this? And one of my young men, he said to me, Miss LeClaire, thank you so much. He's 18. Thank you so much, because my girlfriend asked me to go and get these things and I had no idea what to do. So talking to both genders about the opposite gender actually helps to smooth out things for them, possibly in their future.
Yeah, I think I was thinking that just generally as a society, we speak to boys and girls differently about sexual health, even from when they're young. I have my kids are little, so I've got little girls and boys, and they it just seems more, some things seem a little more easy just to talk about, or to say, like, this is your penis, for example, and yes, I can see you're playing with your penis. And that seemed like a little more, I don't know, normal, even though it's not, than the little girls. So, okay, I just went sideways strangely on that. There was a question on how do you talk about consent and where do you start?
So that's a topic we start very young as well. However, when we talk about consent with the young kids, we talk about friendship and what it means to give and get permission. So that's how I explain it. And I use this analogy of a high five. So I say, we give and consent. This is with the younger kids. This is how I start the conversations with them. So I say, we give consent every single day without even realizing it. It's about giving and getting permission to do things with our bodies. So let's say somebody wants to high five you. They're going to put their hand up to high five you. And if you want to high five them back, you're going to put your hand up, you're going to meet theirs, and you're going to have a great high five. Now, let's say someone tries to high five you and you don't want to, so you don't. If they still high five you, they're just hitting you and you're going to get hurt. So that's my kind of way of showing what consent is, because two people have to give permission for an activity to happen. And I don't even start talking about sexual things when they're younger at all. It's just that I'm learning that my body's my body, your body's your body, and we have to have permission to do anything. So even if that's holding hands or playing a game, right? No one can make you play dodgeball. Like they can't make you do anything. It's your choice. And we instill that very young in the kids, that it's your choice on what to do with your body. And you have to respect other people's choices. And with that, at younger ages, we also talk about boundaries. So hearing a no, it can hurt our feelings, right? If someone tells us no, even to play a game or to do that high five, if someone doesn't want to high five us, it can hurt our feelings. But we have to respect other people and they will respect us. So that's kind of how we begin these conversations of consent early. Renee, I don't know if you have anything to add to that one.
So most of us around my age, we grew up with the no means no campaigns. We have found that did not work out terribly well. So now when we're talking about consent with older students, we say there must be an enthusiastic yes. So that is for an older conversation. And in my comm class recently, I had a student who was just like, I did not give an enthusiastic yes. I gave kind of like a meh. And it was still kind of pushed towards me. And I said, in that case, that person was not respectful of your boundaries. It has to be an enthusiastic yes. So starting while you're young and then older, it's an enthusiastic yes. And I believe that's what they're doing now at the post-secondary levels. Those are all of the campaigns there now.
Absolutely. So we teach in high schools about the FRIES of consent. So it's kind of an acronym, FRIESS. So the F means it's freely given, which means there can't be pressure, which sounds what happened. Like you kind of said meh, and it was still pressuring you. Consent's not there. Even if somebody says yes, that doesn't mean consent is there, because they could have said, no, I don't want to. Oh my God. Okay, fine. Let's do it. They were pressured to give that answer that wasn't freely given. You have reversible. You can always change your mind. Even if you said yes, you can say no. Even if you're in the middle of doing something, you can change your mind. It has to stop. Informed, you have to know what you're agreeing to. So if someone's like, oh, do you want to fool around? And you say yes, they don't have a free for all. You have to be informed on what you're consenting to. The E is our favorite, that enthusiastic yes. Consent's not hard. If people aren't enthusiastically saying yes, that's a huge sign not to engage in it and to stop what you're doing. Talk to your partner, make sure they're okay. And then our 2 S's is specific for every activity. So even though you agreed to make out, doesn't mean they can put their hands on you. They need consent for every step of intimacy. And then the final S is sober. So that's kind of our pillars of consent that we're teaching in the high schools right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I've written it down. Okay, we had another question. How do you answer questions about when did you first have sex? So if your child comes up to you and says, tell me about you, what do you say?
So first of all, I reroute, because that's a very personal question. And for me, that's bumping up against the border of what I am willing to talk about personally. And so I reroute and I go, well, every person is different, and some people choose to have sex early and some people choose to wait. Here are some statistics. But we know that our children sometimes will kind of get that stuck in their craw, and they're going to want to kind of push on that. And that's why part of the consent talk early is so important, because you can say, that is a very personal question, and I do not feel comfortable answering that for you. Or you may feel comfortable answering that. That is totally fine. But it is also okay to say, I don't feel comfortable answering that.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like we stemmed out about before, about having those boundaries in these conversations. Just because you're an askable adult doesn't mean they get to know all about your personal life. Like, you can have privacy as well and say, yeah, just like Renee said, just say, I'm uncomfortable sharing that with you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason you're asking? Are you curious about, you know what I mean? And maybe, yeah, like you said, reroute the conversation.
Okay, I think those are all the questions that we had in the chat. I'm just seeing if I had any additional notes on anything. I was wondering how you would deal with, I think you talked a bit about, saying facts and then maybe talking about your values. Are there resources for parents who are just not there, who are just not comfortable with what's going on maybe with their children? And I think those types of resources would be helpful as well. Maybe they're on part of the list already.
So the majority of the resources on the list are targeted to parents. So the majority of the resources will not be for the teens. It'll be for you as the parents. And when we share them, you know what, before they're sent out, and if they are already sent out, we might send them out again. I will write a little description saying the teen friendly ones and the parent specific ones, so you can have that clarification. And there are a ton of resources for parents, because that's not uncommon. It's very common for parents to feel uncomfortable with this. So there's a lot out there.
And what I'll do is I'll send Rachel the resources that I have for LGBTQ2+ youth and their parents, and we will create an LGBTQ2+ youth section. And one of the things that we talked about telling parents, Rachel, and arming them for this is, as parents who are here and showing interest, you are likely the parents who are helping your children navigate these waters. And what can happen is children who don't have parents who are as comfortable or aren't helping them navigate these waters, they will talk to your child. So recently, a friend of mine had a student who was threatening to harm themselves, and they emailed another student. And so what the school did was they checked in on both students, the student in crisis and the student who had been contacted, because they're very, very young. And the student that they contacted, they were like, okay, are you okay? Have you talked to your parent? And that student, they're so wise for their age. They're a very young teenager. They said, yes, this happens quite often because my mom always talks to me about this. And so I have resources that I send my friends, and I always say, I'm very young and I don't have all of the skill to help you, but these phone numbers and these text sites, they can help you. And then I go and I talk to my mom. So as parents who are here, and you will likely have your children who are in that space, please make sure that they have access to these resources and talk them through how to deal with these big conversations. They do not have to be the expert in the room. They do not have to be the counselor. They just have to know how to help somebody else navigate to the right spot.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to wrap up. I think we did get through all of the questions. Like I'm just so grateful that both of you have came out tonight, took the time, put together this presentation. For those of you who don't know, they just met in order to do the presentation. I think it just works so seamlessly, and it's so impressive. So thank you very much again for coming. I think we all learned a lot this evening. And for everyone who is with us, if you'd like to continue to support the Women's Society, we would love you to consider being a member of the Women's Society or donating. And I think that the website to become a member is going to go into the chat. So you can just click on that and it'll take you there. I also want to say a very big thank you to Alberta Blue Cross again for sponsoring these events. We wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. You give us such great ideas too and help direct where we're going with lots of these talks. So we appreciate that. So this is the last lecture for our 2020-2021 series. And we thank everyone for attending. It's been incredible this year going virtual, but we've had a great audience each time. And it wouldn't be here without you guys coming out and supporting us. So thank you very much. We will be back in the fall with more exciting and important mind and body conversations. But if you have ideas of what you want to hear about, please, when you provide the feedback for this, this talk, let us know what those are, because we'll definitely take those into consideration when we're planning during the summer. So we wish you a safe and happy summer, and have an enjoyable rest of your evening. So thanks very much. Bye.